let's turn our attention to the Commission of State Capture now that has been sitting all along, but I suppose attention really became focused on it when yesterday former Environmental Affairs Minister Nomvula Mokonyane denied all allegations made against her by Bosasa Chief Operating Officer Angelo Agrizzi at that Commission of Inquiry into State Capture. She labelled his allegations defamatory, contradictory and desperate. Mokonyane also dismissed evidence by Agrizzi, who earlier testified that she received monthly bribes from Bosasa, totalling about 50,000 rand a month. Nomvula Mokonyane's testimony gained much traction and interest on social media, and joining us to discuss this is political analyst Khaya Sithole. Khaya, good to have you. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, and good morning to the viewers.
All right, so definitely the former minister's testimony was the talk of the town yesterday, without a doubt. What are your thoughts on it?
I think, obviously, there were a lot of things that we expected might actually come through. The approach of saying, let me issue a statement before I actually respond to the questions, that is something that is a strategic tool for her to be able to put some of the issues that perhaps would have been missed by the cross-examination, because if the examination was simply going to be based on the affidavit of Angelo Agrizzi, then some of the things that she would want to put to the commission would be missing. So that opening statement was an important tool for her to at least be able to say, this is really how I feel about the process, and this is what I think are the issues at play here. And of course, it would then, elicit a lot of attention and perhaps some sympathy from some supporters, because now suddenly this was a person who was giving us references to some of the abuse that she suffered even recently. So she mentioned the whole George Floyd link. And of course, that was useful for her to put out there, but not very useful in relation to the questions that she has to answer to. Because, for example, the issues that we're dealing with here have got absolutely nothing to do with what has happened in 2020. These are all historical issues, so you still actually have to answer to the issues that have been put to you. So I wasn't surprised that she made that particular approach, but I think at the end of the day, she still has to deal with the merits of what really has been put to her, and that's where she might probably find it a bit of a struggle to excel.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's get into some of the details of it, because there were a lot of denials coming through. I mean, and especially when we saw Angelo Agrizzi going and confirming from his point of view to the Commission of State Capture that basically he said she received 50,000 rand per month from them. She was getting car rentals for her daughter. The family's funerals were paid for, etc. All of this to buy her influence, and a lot more added to that. She, of course, as I mentioned, denying all of these allegations leveled against her by Angelo Agrizzi, and she called them defamatory, contradictory and desperate. I suppose there's no surprise that she would deny all of that.
Yeah, there is no surprise that she would deny it. What she still is struggling to articulate is why exactly would a random person, in her view, like Agrizzi, go through the list of 50 million South Africans and then decide to specifically pick on her. So it's still unclear to us, well, if you're saying none of these things have happened, just talk us through the process of why you would think that he would specifically just target you when clearly you say there was absolutely no relationship, you've never met this man before. So even when he says it's been to your house, you deny that it's been to your house. And in some of her responses, she's like, well, sometimes people might be in my house, but I might be unaware of it. And of course, that is just really difficult to countenance, because you're thinking, yeah, well, if that is the case, you heard this evidence more than a year ago, surely you would have gone back and asked and then said to people, this person says he's been here, and if it turns out that he was indeed in your house at a time that you were not there, surely somebody within your immediate family unit would be able to say, yes, it was on this day that you were not around, so therefore he was or he wasn't here. So I think it's just very difficult to imagine that all of her denials and all of her statements can all be simultaneously true. It just would be a far stretch for the commission to find that she's absolutely correct in everything she's saying.
Yeah. I mean, 50,000 rand a month is a lot of money. I mean, where's the money trail? Where's the evidence? Because that seems to be the thing that's really, really missing here. Hard evidence to follow the money trail.
Yeah, I think perhaps it was quite disappointing of the commission itself, because you would think some of these things would actually be easy to test. So yesterday there was an allegation that Agrizzi put that her birthday party, for example, was held at a particular venue and Bosasa paid for it. She comes and says, well, it wasn't that venue and definitely no one paid for it. And you'd have thought that at that stage, the commission would have then gone and actually queried from the two affected service providers, because now it's now a question of dispute around the venue itself. And of course, it should have been easy to then go to either of the two venues and say, was there ever a party on this day? I mean, it was a birthday party, so you can even narrow down the number of days in which such a thing could have happened, and then say, was the bill paid and who paid the bill? So it was quite surprising that that didn't come to the fore to say, well, he said this, you saying this, but actually we've gone and tested the evidence, and this is what Silverstar Casino or the Victoria Guest House is saying. So it was surprising for me that that was missing. And obviously the money trail is still the elusive component, and we have to always acknowledge that perhaps Watson was far ahead of all of us. He was far ahead of the game, because this was not a person who did it through the formal banking structures. This was a person who operated off the market, if you want to call it that. Yeah. So, of course, a lot of transactions where you cannot actually prove that a person was a recipient, where it was hard cash exchanging hands, it's always going to be very difficult to prove it, but you would hope that Agrizzi might still have to actually put something that we can say, oh, now there is the indisputable proof. And if it's just going to remain his word versus her word, actually nothing much is going to materialize from that.
Yeah, and that's the reality, because that's what it is right now. It's a he said, she said kind of a testimony that's going on. I mean, even though we saw the video when Angelo Agrizzi was testifying of all the wads of cash that was being counted and handed out, but like you say, this is cash, so there's just not a money trail. But what she mentioned, which was quite interesting, was that Gavin Watson was a friend, always has been a friend of her and the ANC, but indicated that there was a fallout between Watson and Agrizzi. And she went on to say that Agrizzi is a racist who's using her as a scapegoat because he couldn't get what he wanted. Let's get some views on this. Do you think it's a standard defense response, or perhaps maybe there's truth to this?
It's quite nonsensical, let's face it. Because, again, the issue that I raised earlier on, she still doesn't explain to us that, okay, fine, he is a racist. There are 50 million South Africans. Why you? Why did he come for you specifically? What was it about you that made you so unique that you ended up in his radar? So I think she's still struggling to articulate that. But of course, she's perfectly correct. Agrizzi is a confirmed racist. And of course, if a person is a confirmed racist, we always have to take the type of things that they do with a particular pinch of salt. So that's one part of the conversation. But we still have to deal with the underlying transactional issues that are being raised here. And of course, for me, it's still a matter of, I'm not going to take whatever Agrizzi says as a universal gospel truth, but now let us actually identify and talk about every single individual allegation and then say, well, he says this happened, what is your view? And I think you sort of saw the weakness or the holes in her argument when she engaged in this dispute around the existence of a guardhouse. And firstly, it says the walls are so high, that's what the commission says, the walls are so high, an innocent bystander, a passerby cannot possibly look at that and say, that must be a guardhouse, for example. And I'm going to insist that this is possible. That was absolute rubbish, and we could all see right through it. So it's still going to be very difficult for her to actually maintain this line of defense that simply says, this is a random person who's never been to my house, who Googled the images of the house and therefore could make up all these stories. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah. I mean, I was listening to that as well and wondering, I'm not sure that this is going to hold up. And then it was the whole issue of the Aston Martin that came up and the colour of the Aston Martin, whether it was, she has a white Aston Martin, not a black and blue one that the individual had initially said. So it's a tough one to listen to. But what was said by her was that she never met Agrizzi, nor had he or a Bosasa contractor been to her house, as he had described in his testimony. But a lot was put forward yesterday to prove otherwise. And, whether it be WhatsApp messages and an email paper trail showing that, there had been work done there, but she was saying she had nothing to do with it. She was never in charge of maintenance at the house, and it may have been her husband, and that somebody needed to give access to the guards to allow these people into the house. But her husband's not around anymore. Unfortunately, he passed last year. But, this again is a difficult scenario to prove.
Yeah, it's a very tough one because, unfortunately, indeed, her husband has passed on, and also Gavin Watson has passed on. So suddenly we're really just down to the word of Agrizzi versus the word of Nomvula Mokonyane. And I think for me, the concerning thing about that is, I suppose you couldn't have preempted that your husband would lose his life. But at some point in time, you'd have said, hey, these people have said all these things about me. Let me immediately get on the process of trying to actually find out what the case is. And I think the defense that says, well, actually, the person who could have answered that is not here, doesn't deal with the question of, actually, this person came and dragged your name here. This person came and said that you are responsible for these things. So why did you not take it upon yourself to actually check what the facts were and then be able to be in a position to clear your name? And I think we saw an example of that in one of the instances where there was a dispute around who paid or who was responsible for the security upkeep of her house. So in one case, she says that the state is responsible, and then it may have been her husband, and then the question as well, surely you could have gone to the state and say, guys, please confirm that you did indeed take care of the security features of my house at this particular point in time. And she turned around and said, that's not her responsibility, that's the responsibility of the commission. That's a very, very difficult line of reasoning, because you're thinking, you are the person that is being dragged out here, and if you insist that the state was responsible, well, get the state to confirm that they were responsible, because then it suddenly immediately kills off Agrizzi's assertion. But for you to keep it alive and say, well, hopefully the commission will figure out on its own, when clearly the commission didn't do that, it's self-defeating in my view. So it was just a very difficult one to understand why she would persist on that line, unless, of course, she doesn't believe that, the state would actually back up her statement.
Yeah. Now, let's look at other issues that were brought up. Nomvula also went on to say that there was nothing untoward about Bosasa doing charity work at her hometown of Kagiso, Gauteng, and across the country. However, she says that contrary to Agrizzi's allegations, she never benefited personally from Bosasa's community social investment program, saying food supplies only arrived at her house once. So again, bringing into the whole idea that, Bosasa supported the ANC and supported certain projects, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Again, she is missing the point here. Firstly, the point that I suppose wasn't well ventilated through the commission yesterday is that if a company like Bosasa wants to benefit the community of Kagiso, there's absolutely no need for them to go through a conduit in the form of an MEC or even, the premier or whatever she could have been at that point in time. So again, we do not understand why she then had to feature in this particular transaction, so she doesn't explain that. And I think also this idea that, there's nothing wrong with Bosasa doing particular things. Of course there's nothing wrong with Bosasa doing particular things. The question at hand here is, did Bosasa do these particular things with the expectation of protection from politicians, for example, with the expectation that they'd be insulated from particular investigations? Agrizzi specifically said that, it would be Nomvula who would go and speak to the president about the question of the hawks are getting too close, do something about it. Those are the issues here. So for you to come and say, yes, of course, there's nothing wrong with the corporate entity doing some, social responsibility, that is not the question being put here. That is not even a matter being tested. It's a question of if an entity does so and there's a politician involved, either as a conduit or as an enabler, is that appropriate, and why did it happen?
Yeah, when we look at everything that has come out, we can nitpick into everything that is said, but looking forward, and let's sort of draw some scenarios here. What is the likelihood that the rest of the case against her basically indicates absolutely no criminality?
Yeah, difficult one. I think the lawyers must come and answer that. So, from what you saw with Agrizzi's statement, at the end of the day, we just want to know what happened. Did you receive the 50,000 rand? And if you did, what was it for, and why did you accept that, particularly when you're a public official? Because I think at the end of it, it's going to be a matter of whether public representatives actually understand the limits of what they can and cannot do based on, obviously, the office that they hold, and, of course, the question around perceptions of what happens when business and politics intersect. And I think at the end of the day, that's really what we're going to try and figure out. Whether now that attracts criminal liability, particularly in a retrospective manner, is going to be a very difficult one, because I think the hurdle or the test for proving criminality is probably going to be much higher than what the commission is simply doing, because the commission is simply engaging in a fact-finding mission. So I wouldn't say that this translates to criminality, but of course the lawyers must be in a position to answer that better than anyone else.
How can we read the public's feeling when it comes to the commission these days? Because, there's so many big issues that we're dealing with right now, one being at the top of the list, a pandemic. And this has been going on for such a long time, and we still have not seen anything happen, and it's costing the taxpayer a lot of money that could possibly be used elsewhere, and a lot has been lost prior to this, and that's what's been trying to find out, but it's costing money to find this out. I mean, what is the public's attitude towards all of this when we sit and we watch these stories unfolding before us, and the denials and the back and forth and the accusations and the he said, she said, and yet it is still not actually in court? This is still just a talk shop, basically.
Suppose the context that sums it up for me is the question of how much money was allocated to the Tourism Relief Fund, for example, in trying to save tourism businesses during the pandemic. If that answer turns out to be 20 million rand and you spend 700 million rand on what is a fact-finding mission that is still struggling to find the facts, then you can sort of see where the priorities of the state lie. Then you can see where the priorities of the government of the day are. And I think, obviously, there's a lot of fatigue. 700 billion rand is not a small number, and this is an ongoing bill. And I think if somebody to say, let us put a stop to it now and see what the value of the first 700 million rand has been, is anyone prosecutable? Has any part of the commission's term of reference been finalized? I think we will get the answer that pisses off people more than satisfies them about the merits of this commission.
Yeah, and today it continues. So we'll see everything happening once again today, and see what unfolds out of this. Just one final question to you as we enter into news. We've got about a minute to go. If Arthur Fraser were to spill the beans, do you think there's much more to come?
This is a man who was in a position to create a parallel intelligence structure network in the country that nobody knew about. So yes, he remains, for me, perhaps one of the most critical witnesses that might ever be. But when it was said yesterday that he's going to spill state secrets, I think some of that was actually just a politicking aimed at trying to put a chill to some of the things that some people might be wanting to say. The definition of what secrets are, but remember the whole point that was raised is that he's the only person who stands accused of treason, and I suppose the only defense against treason in his view must be the absolute truth. So if he does engage in the absolute truth, then we're going to see fireworks. But being Arthur Fraser, I don't have much in the way of expectations, unfortunately.
All right, Khaya, let's leave it there for this morning. Thanks so much for your analysis. Political analyst Khaya Sithole, helping us have a look at what happened yesterday. Former Environmental Affairs Minister Nomvula Mokonyane's testimony at the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture for a whopping 5 hours. A lot was said. It was a long day, but what really came out of it? And that's, I suppose, what we were trying to figure out.